Welcome to the yet another lecture for fundamentals of game development. Today's topic is about how actually the game industry functions. Of course, I've been saying again and again that you are most probably proficient people who understand how software development works or how software developing organizations work. But on this third lecture of Fundamentals of Game Development, we are going to be talking explicitly about how game companies work and how game studios operate. On next week, well, not next week, but on the next lecture, we complement this part also by having an industry viewpoint where a real-life CEO of a game studio talks about their first years and how their game studio got together and what happened during those first formative years of the organization. Anyway, today we are having a number of interesting things. You probably want to take notes or at least download the PDF here because we are quoting directly things from several companies and game studios which have been widely successful or even reinventing the entire game industry at one point or another, and which are currently still in the billion-dollar markets with their products and world famous and known throughout the world. So let's get into today's topic then. As mentioned, if we need to have one title for today's lecture, it is games from the viewpoint of software engineering, because we all know that the games industry is a sort of creative industry. But like mentioned on the last lecture about software design and software tools, even though we share several things and the games industry people who design the products or try to come up with the artistic aspects of the products might consider the area as a creative one, there's still the hard, cold fact that games are developed by doing programming work and development work. So today we are going to dwell on this aspect, also talk about the skills required, how these organizations test stuff, how their budgets are managed, how they actually find customers, and how their business usually runs. Of course, there's fringe cases here and there, but if you are, for example, making a mobile game free to play and with the paid additions or paid DLC content, you more or less tend to follow the same path. So these are the things that we are talking about today, and focusing on the fact that even though we are talking about games industry, we are still doing software engineering work. But in all, if we start with the software development, so there's a sort of list of things that are related to software development work, especially if you are running a startup company. So you do have some development process and you are doing development phases. It doesn't matter if you are doing continuous deployment or continuous integration, Scrum, Waterfall, whatever, you still have a development process and phases you need to do. Design work, development work, testing work, and then maintenance work. It's just something you need to do if you are in the software business. Similarly, you have tools and techniques. You have a certain programming language. You have certain programming environment, development engine, tools to do test automation. Whatever you need to do, you have tools and techniques. Also, you probably have a way of testing your software. You need to ensure that everything is in place, everything works, everything fulfills the criteria on which your customers or your users or someone who is paying you for the development of software actually grade or deem that your work is done or that everything is good enough. So that's test process, and there's activities you need to do to actually achieve a certain level of quality. On the quality itself, because you have a certain objective, you also need to somehow measure your quality. Usually in smaller organizations, the quality is that, well, it works, now it's good. On the larger organizations or larger services or whatever you are doing, you more or less have some way of measuring quality. Not perhaps the absolute quality, but relative quality. In a sense that you know if your last batch or last upgrade or last addition was a success or faulty. Because if it's a faulty one, then you roll back and continue from the last position. Or you do something else like A/B testing with the user to establish which one is the better way of doing things. For example, Amazon likes to do this. That's why you sometimes see an Amazon web shop and it has some completely weird widgets you have been selected to be user of. And if it's not good enough, if it's not liked enough, or if the users don't find it useful, then it's gone. Because no one liked it, because it didn't fulfill the quality requirements. There's also actually a full set of measurements to establish what the software quality could be or how it could be measured, but that's somewhat beyond the scope of this course. Just know that there is a standard for how to define quality in software, similarly as how to define or how to follow certain development or test process steps. If you need to do something or define something for larger customer or organization which is buying your outsourced work, then you might want to follow some, or say that you follow some guideline, whether it's a certification or something like that. There's also a certain aspect of creativity involved, especially if you are doing mobile applications. You need something so that your product or service is something that differentiates from your competition. Or it's something novel, something completely new that makes money. No one needs fifth calendar software on their mobile phone, but for example, several small mobile apps like ordering food from restaurant, which doesn't normally deliver to home addresses. Working as a middleman there actually has been a fairly successful thing lately. Or the taxi cab software, or well, driver for hire software more or less. These are something that's creative. They create something new from the existing resources or tap into something that people are actually willing to pay for. Similarly, you have assets. You need to have at least something, whether it's knowledge capital. I mean, you need programmers, you need people who understand back end or front end, or people who understand the technology you are working with, so that you can even have anything in your organization. And especially if you are a startup company, you need funding, you need to decide what's your first entry product. What are your key assets? What are your starting assets? For example, if there's a regional development or regional startup factory or something like that, they might be able to provide you with certain help to start your business. But nevertheless, you need funding to stay afloat, because otherwise you are just having a very, very expensive hobby, which doesn't make you any money. Finally, you have human resources. So you have people who have experience, knowledge, and who have certain level of training, education, certificates, whatever. On some industrial domains, you need to have certain certificates for the people who are doing quality assurance work on your product. Or you need to have certain certification so that your software can be never installed into a power plant or whatever framework or platform. But nevertheless, even if you are just doing something funny, then you still have human resources or human knowledge, and your organization requires expertise so that you can actually do programming work. So this is a software organization. And of course, considering that there's several different things here, how do we do software? On what tools we do software? How do we do quality assurance? How do we design our things? How do we run our business, and what sort of people we have? Is actually exactly the same with the game studios. So only thing differentiating software industry and games industry on these aspects is that I added one word to the center balloon here. So basically, if you go to a game startup or creative startup or creative software engineering startup, I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily games, it's just a playful design for something boring and normal, like making a game out of filling your income tax, which is an example I keep using all the time because it doesn't exist yet, but still, all these things actually are the same. So now that you are studying for software engineering degree, if you want to pursue a career in something like developer or systems architect or technical expert or something to this degree, then you can also look into the games industry. It's basically the same thing, or trying to find funding for your products. It's more or less the same thing. And this is also why we have this course. Because even though we are engineers, we probably are not something that someone considers a hugely creative game designer. We are still learning things which are more or less preparing you to work also as a software developer. So today we are looking into the things in a bit more detail on what makes these, what similarities and differences there actually are, because most of the things are fairly same, especially if you are doing a startup making a phone app service or making a startup making phone game. That they are almost exactly the same sort of organizations. So, how do we make games? Or why do we make games, more or less? Well, first of all, being a realistic says that you make games because you can make money out of it. This is a bit older chart, but it still gives you a fairly good idea on what's going on with the industry. So these are creative industries mentioned here. The green one is games, blue one is movies, and the yellow one is music. Already in 2013, it was apparent that the music industry is a dwarf. It's a really, really small area of entertainment. Especially considering games, which have been growing constantly for several years now. Actually, games and movies are right now at the same level apart here, 130 billion US dollars yearly. So games and movies are more or less the same size of an industry. And the music industry is something that's fairly small. This is also something that surprises some of the people, because everyone is looking for the new Rolling Stones or what, Beatles or something like that. So why isn't Finnish music industry making huge rock stars anymore, like it used to do 10 years ago? At the same time, people sideline the games industry because it's something that makes money every now and then, when we should be actually considering that the games industry is overtaking movies already worldwide. If you consider the software industry in this context, in 2007, the software industry did $300 billion. So in this scale, it would mean that it's on the upper floor there somewhere. And not only that, that's only the software industry. Industries which make and create software and software-based services. Nothing embedded like automotive or aviation or any of these industries, because the software or the software-based service isn't the thing they are doing. The software industry here is someone like Microsoft or Google or stuff like that. And combining all the industries which include software nowadays would probably be the entire economic world of the entire globe, because all industries more or less need software to do something. But anyway, I'm drifting a bit here. So considering that the software industry on 2007, about 10 years ago, was 300 billion, and the games industry was already then 40 billion US dollars annually on global sales, it also means that the games industry isn't something that really should be ignored if we are considering the entire area of software engineering, or other way around, where do the programming talent or where the programming talent is needed in a global industrial scale. So these are also old information. These numbers haven't really changed that much during the last 10 or so years. So 3 out of 4 households play games. Average age of the players or people using money on games industry products is 37 years. It's closer to the mid-age than high school because there's several different areas of software or games industry and entertainment products, meaning that basically everyone pays for something sometime, or everyone plays something at some time. 42% of the people who buy games or spend money or time with them are female, and every third gamer or people who use game products lists games or video games or digital entertainment as their favorite hobby. So of course that's also something they are willing to spend money on, because that's the one thing they like to do most when they have free time to do something. The number of the average age and the number of female in the demographics usually is no longer a full surprise to anyone, because of course people play. Of course the video games are no longer something that 40-year-old boys do in the basement with the second TV setup like it used to be in the 80s or 90s. And in fact, the new generation of people who actually have been born in the era of smartphones don't find it anything weird, or there's nothing nerdy about playing games, because they have been always, and it's a form of entertainment like everything else. So if we look into the software development and games development, there's several common features or themes. Of course, like I mentioned on the first slide, we always need to do design work. We need to have some sort of form of design, whether it's a prototype or anything else, to understand what we should be doing, what's something that interests our customers, or what could lure the customers to come to our organization. We also need to do development work, and we have programming tasks. There's no crazy way of doing programming work. We need to develop something, we need to do programming. There's no escape on that. Even with the game engines or anything else, they still are just platforms on top of which we do programming work to create our masterpiece. We have development tools. In fact, if we are doing something a bit crazier or different or novel, we might actually be using exactly the same tools as any software developer, because the game engines themselves can't handle stuff that doesn't exist yet. So of course we need to do development with the Visual Studio or even C++ or something to that degree, because we need to optimize things. We need to be able to do something that's completely new, or we need to find a way to get more computing power out of this thing, because even though this has more computing power than all the space missions combined on the early days, it still has some limitations. So if we get more optimized code, we get more cool features. It's simply a game of getting the best and most, getting the best performance out of the platform, so that your games sell better or seem better or give the impression of better quality, or you can cram more stuff into one game. Of course, this is something that's a bit disappearing now, especially if the 5G networks start to work flawlessly. There's basically no idea on where your game is actually happening, but you are playing it on your mobile phone. But keep in mind that this is something that has been promised us for the last 15 years. So of course I'm becoming a bit old, but I'm also a bit skeptical about how fluently or seamlessly it actually works. But nevertheless, you do programming work. You have tools, you need to do testing work. How do you test stuff? You do unit tests, you automate stuff, you test with the user, you test the user interface, the experience, all these normal things which you also do if you are designing a web store or something like that. Because that's what you simply need to do. If you have a crappy product, if your users don't like to use the product, or if you simply don't have the necessary features, or your system crashes all the time, or your orders or deliveries or something don't end up being delivered, or it loses payments, or whatever the reason, you still need to do testing work. And in general, the software, unlike games, and games like software, need to be done in time, in budget, with the intended features and acceptable quality. There's no escape on that. There's some leeway on how do you define the acceptable quality, but still you need to have a time or schedule or budget or features where you intend to release, and you need to have acceptable quality. There's no escape of that on that, because if you release a crappy product, then no one is going to buy your next product, unless you are someone like Blizzard or Activision or some huge company which could probably sell you an empty box from a Prisma store, and you still look for the next product. Well, or activation code that doesn't do anything. There's actually a bit of a misnomer here, because usually if you buy a boxed game from some hypermarket like Prisma, you only get a plastic box with a download code from Steam or something like that anyway. So that analog really doesn't work anymore. But still, you get the idea. So, of course, it would be foolish to say that there's no differences. Of course there are. First of all, the software developers have their audience. The software application usually has its purpose for existing. For example, if you use an app which you can use to order food, then you expect that you will get food at some point and pay money for it. If you are using some software which you can use to hire a driver and car, you press that I need a car, and you expect someone to come to pick you up and take you to the place you are going. If you are paying taxes online, you expect that you will be able to pay those taxes. Or if you are ordering something or doing whatever, chatting with people, you expect that you will be actually be able to contact people, and the people get your message when you send them. However, with games, what do you do with games? You use them or play them to entertain yourself. You entertain yourself and you expect some sort of user experience. If you play a scary game, then you expect that you have some sort of scary experience. If you are playing Gran Turismo or some driving game, you expect that it's close enough simulation so that you find it interesting, or whatever to that degree. So you need to have more emphasis on the market situation. Is this something that's novel enough, or does this have a good market? And you need to have more emphasis on the customers. Will there be enough people paying for this product, or using the free-to-play feature and sometimes buying something? And overall, is there a target audience which finds this very interesting? Does this product have a possibility to become viral success? Of course, viral success is, it's really difficult to define how it happens, but there are some organizations which try to enforce that to happen. It usually also always fails, but still, if you don't have enough customers, you will never have a huge success. So of course, you need to have emphasis on thinking, what are my customers? What's the market I'm entering? What's my competition doing? What's the new crazy theme or something that people find interesting? Going on a market with a zombie game today would be economic suicide perhaps, because zombies are like 5 or 6, almost 10-year-old thing now. So people are getting really bored with all that crap, and looking for something else. Also, well, when we are having emphasis on customers, well, our design needs to also have artistic vision on how things will happen, or what the game should look like, feel like, sound like, what the user experience should be. Of course, if you are doing a web store, you don't really need to consider that part that much. But if you are making something like games, you need to have artistic vision, and of course it would be a good thing if you have an artist to do that. Engineers can draw shit. I'm sorry, they just can't. So you need to have artists or someone who's talented on making that theme or vision or something to actually happen and be presentable enough so that it actually attracts people. There's a inherent thinking in engineering that assault rifle is very good design because it works almost always, but we are not actually looking just an assault rifle with games. We are making an assault rifle that also looks nice. It has to look good, it has to sound good, it has to have a good user interface, and it also has to function. It has to have the technical quality and artistic quality at the same time. This also includes the sound design work. And also, if you are doing some sort of a user experience, then you should probably be doing testing with users. You should have representatives of your target audiences and see what they like. And if they come up with the results or feedback saying that I hate this, I don't like this, I don't find this interesting, then you have to be prepared to throw out everything and redesign everything, because no one benefits from a bad game. If you release one, then you might as well just close down your studio, because, well, your studio makes bad games. It's also about popularity contest, because no one actually needs to use your software to achieve something. Finally, there's also some areas of development like client-to-client multiplayer, artificial intelligence, and 3D mathematics, which are a bit unusual. Of course, artificial intelligence is now a thing. Everyone wants artificial intelligence on everything. They used to want blockchains, but now everyone wants artificial intelligence. And that's also something that's currently being explored as a venue of making more smart tools or self-driving cars or whatever, drones which can deliver stuff. But still, artificial intelligence programmer isn't really that common thing. Or 3D mathematics, or making animations, or client-to-client multiplayer systems. Especially if we are considering game consoles which have fairly relatively limited amount of resources, or certain ways of doing things. And finally, unlike software development, one objective needs to be added. Is the game fun? Or does the game provide the user experience we want to provide to our users? Of course, there's always some fringe areas of people who find the product attractive or might find the product attractive. For example, an animation series like something like My Little Pony, which for some fairly obscure reason, 20-year-old males find it very engaging and have formed a huge fan community around it. I'm fairly certain that the people who made the original reboot didn't expect this to be the market audience, but it just happened. Of course, we shouldn't expect that to happen with our products. But is the game or product we are making providing you with an user experience we'd like to give to our customers? Like I mentioned, if I'm playing a Silent Hill game, it shouldn't make me laugh. It should be really uncomfortable experience, especially if I'm playing it with a surround system during nighttime, because that's something I'm paying for, the game to scare me shitless. So, there's also some issues which reflect on how the games are developed when compared against something like how software is developed. For example, this here is a project management and software implementation
process model for very small organizations. The ISO IEC 29110 here more or less defines what software developers should do as a minimum set of things when they are developing something. Very small organization, less than 10 people, if they want to systematically develop something and show that they are doing things. So they have project management, they plan, they do some plan execution, they do assessment and control, they do project closure, they start the implementation, they do requirements analysis, they identify the components that need to exist, they build stuff, they test stuff, and they deliver stuff. Fairly straightforward. And this is something that's generally agreed to work with the software industry. But of course, can this work with games? No, it can't. This is actually something that we were doing a research on with the Finnish Software Measurement Association. It simply doesn't work. If you are making games, you can't make a strict design before you implement and test and prototype stuff. So at least the minimum amount of things you need to have is a planning phase, the pre-production, the implementation phase, the production, and delivery phase, the post-production. And during the implementation, you need to have iteration, because you never commit to one design and then just forget the stuff. That's not how game development works. You need something initial to have a target towards which you start to work, and then you make some, you test some, you make some, you test some. You refine and revise your designs based on the customer feedback and so on and so on. This is actually how the organizations work. I've been showing this slide on several places, so I'm not going to go through this in detail again. But basically, these are the basic models which the companies tend to follow if they are game studios. They have a pipeline model where they follow an early brainstorming and prototype approach. If they are able to sell that prototype to someone internally or externally who will fund the production, then they do iterative design and testing and development work, and when they get publisher approval, they put it online and start the maintenance cycle, in which they add more things or try to attract more customers or use marketing to buy in more people and get the free-to-play process or free-to-play cycle to roll. If they are smaller organization, or if they don't have customer or publisher, internal or external, they do the iteration cycle. They have an idea and they start to roughly plan and design, and you work towards getting something together so that it's publishable. It's a fairly more obscure method of doing a rough plan, development work, refining your design for the rest of the game to see what works, what can be done, testing stuff, getting feedback from anywhere, whether it's possible funders or possible publishers or test users or whatever. And when you run out of money or time, then you decide that, okay, now we will put this online and try to achieve something with the game. If not and nothing else, then at least get publicity, get a portfolio running, so that we have games we can show to publishers or larger game studios and get a contract or subcontracted to do development work for them, or develop games for them, or be products like mobile version of their franchise games or stuff like that. No one wants to work with a game studio that hasn't published anything, because they can't do games. If you have a couple of games in your portfolio, then you might actually get contracted work. And this is actually one way of keeping your business afloat. But anyway, on both these models, the idea or on what to publish, it actually comes from the decision of funding. If you have a publisher, if it's internal publisher, it means that you have several teams and your company management or owners or whoever decides what's the idea we will do next. You will test the thing with the prototype. If it doesn't work, or if it's not fun, or if it's not engaging, then you throw the prototype away and design something else. If you are a small studio, then you just try a couple of ideas and stick with the best one. Try to get it published so that you will at some day be able to go towards having several ideas from which you can choose a thing. Also, if you find a niche, it's probably a good thing to make the product anyway, because it gives you publicity, if nothing else. So, of course, these mean that you also need to focus on a bit different things in software development than in game development than in software development. For example, the user experience, like I said, is the key. We always test the technical aspects, like it loads, if the saves work, the new games work, their settings work, all the animations run correctly. There's no out of sync with the input or what happens in games or the sound effects. Everything works. It's technically correct. But we focus on the content. What's the user experience? And also, for example, that there's no always win strategies. If we have a long game, it gets boring if there's one way of always winning. There's actually also a part of it is with the multiplayer things. So we all know, especially if you have been playing multiplayer games, that you have to sometimes nerf stuff. So because it's a game-breaking broken feature. So these things shouldn't exist in an optimal game. Of course they shouldn't, but they still do. But you also have to test against these internal logic problems. This is something that's completely novel to the games industry. And in fact, actually, what we found when we were conducting studies between game startups and software startups is that game startups actually have more dedicated resources on testing work than software companies. Game companies have almost 80% of the self-defined optimum of resources, and they spend much more time on doing testing work than software companies in general. In that sense, testing-wise, game products tend to be much more refined at the first launch, when the minimum viable product exists. On software, you can sometimes accept problems with the first launch, but with games, you make the first impression, and that's something that you are using to sell your product. With the software that has other inherent uses, you always can find more people who might be using your service or might find your software useful. But with games, you actually have to pay very much attention on the first impression. Okay, so of course this reflects to the testing work in technical testing work itself. So how do game developing companies test? They do user testing, usability testing, explorative testing, and unit testing. These are the four things they focus on. And out of these four, only the last one, the unit testing, and usually automated unit testing, by the way, is only one which is technically oriented. It's used to ensure that everything works. Everything else is about usability, or finding out the stupid errors or the stupid problems. Like, for example, that you can accidentally fall off the face of the earth if you walk too far up to the ocean, like you could do in the original World of Warcraft. Actually, in one island, which they failed to add a climbable harbor into the island itself, you actually had to kill yourself by swimming swimming over the end of the map, because the game had a certain problems at the first launch feature. Of course, the game studio also didn't expect someone to try to jump with the blink from the highest point of the mountain, but that's a separate story, really. But anyway, that's something you catch with explorative testing. That's not something that anyone who is actually sane and following the game wants to try out, unless they find out that there's no fall damage if you hit water. So if you can jump far enough, you might be able to jump literally out from the planet. Also, on the objectives themselves, technically, good enough is enough. That's a fairly good approach. If it's fast enough, if it's responsive enough, if it's simple enough, then it's enough. We don't do unnecessary or additional work on the product when we get it to the technical point where it works. Mechanically, we focus on that there's always something you can do to counter some activities, or you test the internal logic. Because it's fairly annoying to play a game, where, especially multiplayer, where regardless of whatever you do, your opponent always wins because they have one killer app or one killer move or one killer activity, which will always trump everything you do. There's a very good example of this is the card duel game on the South Park team, which I unfortunately don't remember the name anymore. It was developed by a Finnish company, and it was Finland was the first places where it was test used. There was one broken ability you might get randomly when you create your character. I think it was called Arrow Storm or something like that. And that was mechanically broken. The players who got Arrow Storm always, or almost always, won the duels, simply because that was way too powerful and killed every other guy the other opponent had put on the field at that stage. So the game was mechanically broken. So why would I want to play a game where I'm getting constantly the crap beaten out of myself because I wasn't lucky enough to get one card at the start of the game? Well, I don't, and that's why you don't either know the name of the game unless they fixed something later. And also, on the user experience, you might want to test, is this what we really want, or is this what our customers really want to use? On this, there's an example of the one platformer game where the bug introduced a new way of moving. I think I told this on the last lecture. But anyway, it bears a repetition that the bug made the game much more funnier. The test users loved the new way of climbing on the walls, like you would do with a Spider-Man or something like that. So the entire game was revised around that mechanic because the user experience testing found out that that's hugely or majorly more engaging to the test audience than anything they had put up so far. So of course they had to design the game around that feature. Now this was at the stage when the game mechanically and technically was already done. They were just testing out the different level layouts, what will be left on the final product. And they found out that they have to redo the entire content of the game simply because that was much more better than anything else they had done before that. Okay, so on the tool aspect, on this course we are studying the game engines. Usually I recommend that you use Unity, of course. Now you are allowed to use whatever tools or more or less you want on your own game. But in general, the tools exist mostly to allow easy prototype-based approach on development design. Actually, that's one of the things that most game studios agree on. It doesn't matter what you are using as long as you can do quick prototyping and test out different ideas. Of course, most companies also use fairly popular frameworks because they simply don't have enough people to do the development work. For example, optimize their physics engine and stuff like that. This is something that has changed from the 90s. Before the mobile games became a very, very large part of the industry, most of the games were made completely by the studio themselves, or the game engine or the game development environment was made by the game developers and the game studio because there was nothing else. But realistically, the amount of self-made tools it doesn't exist anymore. If you need to do animations, you use animation tools. If you need to create a physics engine, you use a game engine. You draw the assets, and even some assets can be bought as libraries. If you go to a trade fair in Europe, for example, Gamescom, which is a huge thing in Germany every summer, and spend something like 10,000 euros. It sounds like some money, but it's actually not that much, considering that you can buy with that 10,000 euros a library of 50 to 60,000 different themed objects. So you don't have to draw all the stools and chairs and windows and doors and floors and stuff like that yourself. You just give a commission to a object studio and say that you want to have 50,000 island and Atlantis themed objects for my new game, which revolves around submarines and whales. And that they more or less, well, obviously they'll you also use their common objects or stuff like that, but you can buy these things, even objects, even characters, all the design. Actually, in some organizations, game studios, the tools extend to the degree that there's only 1 or 2 graphical artists in the entire game studio, just making the main character or the major characters so that they look like they are intended to look, and fix the problems or do some small editing work on the existing library. If you have money, you can buy almost everything. But of course, the problem is that if you don't have money, then you have to do everything. So, considering the business logistics, of course, this is a course by Software Engineering Lab, so we are not going too far into these areas, but it's a good thing to understand how game business works. We start from the 90s or the early 2000s with the traditional way of doing game distribution or game business. The traditional way mentioned here is actually fairly simple. The developer, that's you on this scenario, gets to keep 10% of the revenue. And 90% of the money goes to the publisher who paid for the original work, or the distributor who distributed the game console or installation boxes to the stores, and the retailer who owns the stores or manages the sales. So they get to keep 90 cents out of every euro you made. So not fairly nice deal, really. This is also why there were so few developers. If you had a huge hit, then you might make some money, and you actually wanted to be the publisher, because that's the first organization which actually makes large amounts of money out of all these things. So then we got to the digital distribution era. So now you could download the game directly to your mobile phone or game console. So things changed a bit. Of course, because there's no longer need for the distribution, because it's a digital distribution way, the original approach was that the developer gets to keep 70% of the money, and the retailer, on this scenario, Google, Apple, App Store owner, or Steam or someone else, takes 30% cut of also including also all the maintenance work of the infrastructure, network, and other stuff. Of course, realistically, you also need to have a marketer, who used to be the publisher here, who takes 35% cut. So basically the publisher didn't actually go anywhere. They just became a company doing marketing work or publicity work or visibility work for your product. Because you need to have visibility. If you don't have any marketing work done, then no one knows you exist and the game doesn't go anywhere. But of course, free-to-play approach even changed this approach, because there's no money in distributing something that's free, but there's money in actually offering extra services or things you can buy when you are playing a free-to-play game. So, but before going to the free-to-play games, then let's take a look at the pay-to-play stuff here. So this is actually something that was told to me by one game studio. They made 2 games, their first game and their second game. And the first game was more or less a tech demo for their infrastructure, which really wasn't marketed that much. They were just testing out that everything works and everything goes fluently. Did some test runs on how many people they are going to get with a small amount of money and that sort of stuff. It was basically what they would later say non-marketed game, and it profited them 74 euros total, between 5 people, taking 4 months to make the game. Not really something that you can use to reserve your out-of-orbit flight with the SpaceX or anything like that. But the second game they made, they actually had a marketing company. They had a sort of publisher with them who arranged all the publicity and who was interested in their product, that they only took a cut of the sales. After having it on a couple of on a mobile store for a couple of months, they had already made 25,000 euros out of it. It was a minor hit in Finland, also I guess somewhere like Korea, South Korea, not North Korea, South Korea, and also a couple of other places. But still, the only real difference here was that the other one was marketed. It also mentioned that if you are on the top 25 in any store list, like the App Store used to have, it generates you 5,000 euros per day. It's not much. It's actually less than you'd expect. Of course, if you are a huge company, are on the all top list, like most of the stuff Supercell does, it probably makes much more money. But if you are on top 25 of your own category, then you get 5,000 euros per day. Considering that if you make mobile games, it takes 3 to 6 months to make if you have a team of 5-ish people who are very good at their job. And if you are doing pay-to-play numbers, 90% of sales come within the 1 month of release. So if you do 1 month of sales, then you have to pay for the next 2 to 5 months to make the next product. Of course, there's actually the pay-to-play business model that hasn't died completely. It's actually fairly popular in the kids' games. Why? Because the parents don't want their small children to play around with the things that might accidentally order something, or if they give their phone for them to play with, the kids can't get frustrated and spend 100 euros on buying more diamonds or bear asses or whatever you are using in that game to buy for stuff. So actually pay-to-play model exists. It's not the most popular one, but there's still actually business domains where this still exists. But if we go to free-to-play model, everything is completely different. First of all, in free-to-play models, marketing is basically purchasing users. How many euros you have to spend to get one new user, regardless of the place you are spending your marketing in. If for some reason the best way to get new users is to have an advertisement on a local paper, then of course use that one. But most probably the best way would be to buy some social media visibility or something else. So only thing that is interesting in free-to-play approach is that how many euros you have to spend to get one new user who is interested in your product. Because up to 14% of people who download and start your game once actually play it the second time. And out of these people who actually started more than once, 4% of players might buy something once or twice. Give you a couple of euros to get rid of some early showstopper or something like that. And there's the 1% of players, or actually less than 1% of players, who are whales. They provide constant stream of income. If they are crazy or interested enough, that might be actually thousands of euros per month. But these 1% of the players are the ones you need to catch. And the 4% of players who buy something are nice to have. But it's actually a game of attracting the whales, people who will pay obscene amounts of money to play your product. And actually, the money comes from the maintenance stage. You are doing continuous development for the new content. That's called live ops, meaning that you are constantly upgrading your game to add more things to do so that these whales don't run out of things to buy. Because it might be a competition like Clash of Clans is or something like that, but really if they hit the maximum level and they don't have anything to spend their money on, they will probably do something else because they run out of things to do. It's similarly as if you have a Netflix and if you have watched all the episodes of some TV series, then it will take a while if you to watch it again, or like some people don't ever rewatch stuff they have already done or seen. So similarly here, you do live ops, continuous development, as long as you attract more whales or have enough whales to actually keep your game afloat. If you have this many downloads, the blue ones are the people who download your game, try it once, and never come back. The green ones are the ones who keep playing the game, but unfortunately they don't pay for anything. They don't pay for any feature or thing that you could actually throw in your game. And the yellow ones are the people who might buy something once, twice. And the red ones are the whales. And we actually had to have 200 people here because the whales are so rare that we needed to have much more than 100 users to be at least close to one marketing study we found and have one whale here. So that red dot there is the person paying your salary. The yellow ones are tipping you for good service. The green ones like you enough to actually bother with your game, and the blue ones were interested enough to try out but didn't like something they saw or found it too derivative or something like that. And of course, these are only the people who saw the advertisement and actually did something. If you are buying marketing, then you have to also pay for the people who saw the advertisement but didn't click on it, or didn't install your game, or installed but never bothered to actually start the game. So really, it's a numbers game. Can I get enough people or users, whales, those red dots, to pay for all my salary? Or well, it also would be nice if it pays for everyone else's salary and maintenance and stuff like that. But this is actually the cruel world of free-to-play model. You pay to get more visibility, to get more people. And actually, from presentation by Rovio, they actually mentioned that because they are no longer the leading company of the area, they are not talking strictly about themselves. But these are the 5 things that you need to design or need to have in your product to be successful. Because this is something that combines all the huge successes of the games industry, especially in the mobile area. If you are decided to make PC run strategy games, then it's a completely different thing. But if you are in the mobile game business, and want to make money out of games, you should go mobile. You should make free-to-play game. You have to use enough purchases to actually fund your work. You have to focus on finding your whales. Who are those people, those red dots who are spending money on your game? And focus your marketing on getting new people and attracting those whales who will pay you money. And finally, do live ops. So start with a small product, the minimum viable product, and then start adding stuff so that your existing whales don't swim away and you give them more content to fiddle around with, as long as the product is something that makes you money. It's really, really creative mind like. I mean, this business presentation is like a spreadsheet, but this is actually a cheat sheet to get the idea on how to get your mobile game startup a successful one. And it doesn't even guarantee that it's a success, but if you have these 5 things in your product, then it might be something that flies. Okay, so considering that the visibility is the key word here. So it was mentioned that the visibility is something that you pay money for. Well, this is because there's also another list of things that Rovio mentioned and the other game studios mentioned about when you are having your startup company. And this is something that you really have to understand. If you don't have your first product, no one cares about you. No one will try out your new app or idea or game. No one will pay for the app you are making. Nobody wants to invest in your team, and no one knows you exist. And this is when you are doing your first product. So everything you will do when you are making your first product or launching your first game is trying to dig yourself out from this hole. So this is the starting point. So this is also why you need to make your portfolio games. Even if the game isn't a huge financial success, it's something that gives people a possibility to see what your team is capable of doing. You can fund your company by selling or loaning your graphical artists, your programmers, your time or talent to some other places. That's actually a completely viable business model. And then design new games or create new games until you find your first hit product so that you can keep doing your own stuff and get your graphical artists and musician and the programmers back from wherever they are loaned to. Also, on visibility, I wanted to add this because this is something that's usually really difficult to explain to an engineer. I'm not underestimating anyone here. I just want to make a point of it. So this is a product. It's a book about computer science fundamentals using esoteric languages, including brainfuck as an example. This is an actual book that exists. I wrote it, so I know it exists. Most of the other people don't know it exists because it sold like 300 copies, but it's available online if you buy. Unfortunately, it's in Finnish. But anyway, this is a product, and it's a really fairly normal school book. Of course, if I were advertising this, I wouldn't use this approach. I'd probably start putting up these sort of flyers or something like this, because that's something that catches people's attention. It's not too complicated example. There's not many things to remember, and it's something that steers the people's interest towards actually getting the idea that, hey, I know this from somewhere. What's that? So it's not only about visibility or being in constantly seen, it's also about how you want to market your idea. Of course, I'm not a marketing genius, because if I were, I wouldn't be working at a university as a lecturer and a professor, but still, there's marketing courses, and if you want to sell something, you really need to at least talk with the people, and not only talk with the people, but also listen to the people who know how to sell stuff. And that's also something that's fairly important to understand if you want to fund or find a game studio. So, back to the point. There's a couple of things that also might be interesting to understand or consider. For example, on the innovation, most games throughout the years are actually, the most selling games are usually just sequels. But actually, that's not entirely true, because of course, there might be money on making sequel after sequel after sequel, because that's something that people know, but also making a franchise out of your product is also, or franchise out of your IPR, intellectual property, is actually a fairly important thing here, because you are trying to sell something that's abstract or something that interests people. There's also the idea that the creative chaos which the game industry said it thrives on, it tries new ideas. Some people say it's a publicity stunt, because developing games, doing game development work, game programming work, animations, fixing all the small things, it's actually a really, really laborious work. But of course, there are creative aspects in it, and creativity in a sense that when you are designing things, you are not very much limited to things that you already know. If you find some new niche or new target area or new theme, especially if you can innovate something that hits the next big trend, you are making huge amount of money. And actually, you should look for new trends or changes in trends, because if you are making something that sells today, in 6 months when your product is out, it's old news. It's already done. Your competition has had 6 months to eat your cake, so to say. So try to go look not for the sequel or like this, but this. Try to look for something new, innovative, creative. And also, you also need to do something new because you want to create new products. You want to create new merchandise, franchise, IPR, and people are always interested in seeing new things. But if you have something strong, Fallout, Far Cry, whatever, then you might, or Assassin's Creed, which actually I think it's now up to 12th installment or something like that. Those of course sell because people are just looking to have more fun, stabby time with their avatar. Actually, this was in 2013. It was on from the same set of data as the slide I showed earlier. So this is the market share of different genres in games. Of course, the action games, sports games, shooter games are popular nowadays. Probably multiplayer games or duels or whatever, those might have influenced these to quite a large degree. But it doesn't actually matter what the top ones are, or if we have PlayerUnknown's Battleground or whatever Fortnite stuff we have on the top. But the important part to understand here is that these slides are, there are several slides. There's family entertainment, role-playing games, adventure games, racing, casual games, strategy games, fighting games, flight simulators, even arcade games have 0.2% market share here. And in fact, 0.1% market share here is $73 million US. So if you can do something like an arcade game, which is a niche group, only 2 people out of 1,000 actually play those games or are even interested in arcade games. It's still $150 million US annually to sell. So basically, if it's good enough, if it's very good, if it's interesting, if it's engaging to your target audience, you will make money out of it. There's no buts and ifs on that. The market is so huge that you don't have to topple Ubisoft or Electronic Arts or these companies to make any money. You can make a family entertainment game and become a billionaire, because that 9% market share is huge amount of money. So, like I said, games deliver user experience. If you have your target audience, then you want to know what might interest them or how engaging and interesting they find your design. And actually, this is something that the technical people in the games industry also agree on. The technical viewpoint was that good enough is enough, meaning that you don't spend time on honing the technical presentation when it hits the sweet spot of being good enough, not breaking, not brilliant, but good enough. And actually most people in the game development, even the programmers, say that it's a creative work with software engineering stuff in it. So they find themselves to be in the creative industry. They liken themselves more to a movie developers or movie makers, in a sense that they are making a product which offers narrative and story and offers you something to do and entertain the audiences, instead of people who are just maintaining a service or SaaS portal or whatever other software. So it's a creative industry where you have to do software engineering work. That's at least the most common mindset. If individually people might have different opinions, but in general the games industry and people working in it consider them to be first creative and then software engineers. However, games themselves are not art for art's sake. This is usually an argument started online at the middle of the night by people saying that games are not art. Well, usually they aren't. They are products. They are products designed with a profit in mind. People who make games want to make games so that it makes money. But if it's artistic or creative, that's a really nice thing to have also, because there's nothing against making artsy games, but most people in the games business consider that they are making a product of entertainment. And art for art's sake is a thing that only people who have already made enough money are aiming for. Of course, there's, for example, of Journey, the game on PlayStation. Of course, it's an art piece. It's very, very good-looking game. It has a very good or very impressive artistic vision in it, but still, it's a game in a sense that it's a multiplayer experience with another player, or alone if you don't have an online capability on your PlayStation, but still it's sold as a game product. Of course, it gives you an artistic experience, but the game is the first thing that it's designed for. And actually almost everyone in the games industry, if they have to select that if they want to make huge amount of money on their work or have huge amount of merit on their work, they almost always go for the profit. And then say on the second sentence that when I have enough money, then I want to be known for my artistic merit. Well, that's cheating on this sense, but still they are making money out of it. It's not art, and it's in art's sake, meaning that it exists because it's a sort of a feeling or artistic thing. And actually, well, even if the design is with profit in mind, there's no real way of doing it. There's a brainstorming, there's pitching contests, there's prototyping, there's pen and paper, and basically it always boils down to the question, what is fun? Is this game fun? Is this offering the right experience? I'm circling around with this topic, but unfortunately there is no real answer here. So, if we consider a normal startup team, what sort of people start to do stuff? Or what sort of people have a snowball's chance in hell of actually making it to the big leagues? Usually, the normal startup team makes a mobile game for smartphone or tablet. More probably phone nowadays, because tablets are a bit of a dying out fad, or have been for a very, very long time. There's 2 to 4 people. They are owners of the company. They don't have salary within. So they are usually designer, programmer, artist, and someone who actually knows how to sell things. Of course, they do all a bit everything, but you usually have one very good programmer, one very good artist, one very good game designer who's usually also capable of testing the mechanics, and one person who is the manager or person selling your product or trying to negotiate a deal for funding or visibility or whatever. This group, if it works, can create a representative game product within 3 to 6 months. And it's actually important, like mentioned earlier, there's an emphasis here that if you are a startup team, your first priority is to get something published. Because unless you publish something, you are not a game studio, you are a hobbyist group. And if you want to go to the trade fairs or anywhere else, the big players are not interested in your organization before you can prove that your team can deliver. If they order something from you, your team is capable of doing things. And of course, you spend most of your money on marketing, tools, licenses, stuff like that. Actually, considering that the most important problems in startups, why they fail, what they need, what's the problems they are facing, the 3 most important problems are money, money, and money, in that order. They are always out of money, and they always would need more visibility. They would always need more marketing. They would always need more testing. They would always need more programmers or better or more graphical artists. So in a startup team, usually if everything works correctly, within 1 year you can start paying yourself a small, modest salary. Sometimes it takes several years. And there's no forgetting that, for example, the original Rovio team, the Angry Birds, which was one of the first huge hits in the mobile games industry, was their 50th game product they made. Not 15th, 10 and 5, 15th. So 49th game was a flop. The Angry Birds, which they went to sell, was actually originally also a flop because it didn't sell that much. But they accidentally invented the €1 game apps and the advertisement paid games, which made them a huge player later. But that's something that's usually forgotten from the Rovio team. So, getting back to the research results. There's a couple of things here mentioned, which are the most important things that matter to game startup companies or game developers in general. The case study companies here are established companies, startups, multinational companies, so on and so on. So based on our analysis, human capital is one of the priority things in all organizations. Like mentioned earlier, the only thing that matters is that your customer is entertained. So you need to have proficient programmers, excellent graphical artists, sound engineers, sound design, level designers to make that experience happen. So everyone needs human capital or experience. Most of the organizations need marketing. And that one organization where the marketing is not considered important at all, being the white box, meaning that it's the least important aspect of their company, is a game studio which had external publisher. So if they agreed to make something, they just make the game and the publisher in Germany handles everything else. Why would we care about marketing at all? Similarly, financing was one of the things, and key partners, well, as in the organizations which didn't find marketing important because, of course, they had someone else doing that. There was also some other things like key resources. This company, case A, I don't remember anymore, but I think that they were making an activity game for some Microsoft thing which was paying a huge amount of their bills. So their key resources were the prototype things they were working on at that time, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, human capital, marketing, financing. And if you kind of replace marketing, you need key partners or partnerships to do that. So those are the things that game studios need to have so that they can exist and work. And finally, if you are not interested in founding a company, this is actually something collected both from Supercell and Rovio. I was in a meeting a year ago, well actually 2 years ago now, in which they summarized what they need or want to have in a people they are looking for. So if you fulfill all these things in the list, I don't understand why you are still in this course. You should be already working in the industry. But the Supercell and Rovio combined their learnings and findings from the people who want to go in the games industry. And first of all, the actual talent is rare, meaning that everyone can teach themselves how to draw or how to do programming work. But if you have talent, that's a completely different ball game. If you have a graphical artist who is really talented, they can easily replace 10, 15 other people. But those 10 and 15 other people who aren't talented can never replace that one very talented person. So you need, if you have actual talent and if you train your talent, then you are starting at a very good position. And it doesn't have to be artistic talent. It's a programming talent, testing talent, finding out what people want. Any talent, but if you actually have talent, then it's a rare user. So also, if you want to go to the games industry, you also have to have some sort of passion for the industry itself, or games themselves. It's a bit of a cliche, and a bad cliche, I'd say, at least to say that you need to have a passion for this game, or a passion for this industry. But keep in mind, it's a creative industry. If you have a mindset that you go to the office at 9 a.m. and leave at 5 p.m. and don't care at all about anything, then you probably will not make it in the games industry. I'm not saying that you have to be prepared to do unpaid overtime. Well, actually, if you are a developer or programmer, you more or less in all industries are expected to do that. But it means that if you don't care at all about what you are doing, you are just fulfilling tickets and then go home, then it's not probably a good place to be. Also, the large companies don't use game engines because the game engine games are not good enough for them. They do optimization work by themselves. They push the envelope, so to say, that they try to advance the technology, at least some degrees. So, of course, large companies like Rovio, they also use game engines. For example, the Bad Piggies is made with Unity. That's true. But if you want to really get a job there, you need to learn C++, understand how optimization works, how the algorithmic complexity works, how to avoid certain pitfalls on performance issues, understand mathematics and physics, because you have to do those calculations by hand if you are going hardcore optimization route. And in general, do several different projects, do several themes, do several genres, so that you actually understand what differentiates the different products. And finally, both companies, or all companies, have plenty of mediocre talent. Don't be that person applying for a mediocre position with a mediocre talent. Focus on your best skills, what you can do, what you are very good at, and try to make that your sales pitch. So, finally, considering that this is something that's geared towards more of advanced startups. So there's also stages on which the organizations grow. Usually the minimal core teams and first priority business startups here are the sort of companies that have been founded on this course and the courses which are predecessors to this one. And usually it means that if you have a designer, artist, and developers, then you have at least something. The more advanced companies start to spend their own money on music assets, or business management assets, or QA, or marketing, or domain experts. These are the things that the real full businesses do. And if you want to start your own company or work in a startup, you more or less need to have strategic partnerships to do your marketing work, help you with the business and management aspects. Get your first, perhaps the second graphical artist as in-sourced skill. Have a musician who understands something about music or make you some elevator music for the levels, stuff like that. But you can't, of course, pay that person, so you need to have them outside. And actually, there's also a fairly straightforward path that most startups follow, because they all have more or less the same restrictions on resources and time, money, human capital, these sort of things. So if you are really looking into this, you should also look into how other companies have been founded and started. Finally, there's a list of research papers. I'm not going to read you these through, but if you are interested in actually studying what games industry is and how it differs or how it functions compared to software industry, this university has had a fairly extensive research on software, games as software and entertainment software engineering. So all these bullet points have their own paper or research paper related to them. So if any of these topics interest you, you can contact me or send email or send a message to the course website, so we can talk about these things more, or you can Google them around and you probably will find them easily. So all about design work, how game development should be taught, how gamification and user interface tailoring can be combined, how user motivation can be detected from the activities they do, how games industry adopts new technology, how different technical frameworks work, how games are developed or tested, or what are the important elements of companies. All these things that I have mentioned on this lecture actually are based on real research, like any proper university lecture should be. So of course, if you are interested in continuing with this topic, for example, on your master's thesis work, then just contact me or other of our faculty staff.
So that more or less covers today's agenda. For the rest of the course, we are now hitting a midpoint of the fall semester. So ensure that, or once again to remind you, that when the deadline for all the deliverables hits, you have to have the following things online: your game being deployed and your game source code also available. You need to have your game trailer and your tutorial projects and the videos related to those tutorial projects also visible to the teaching staff. Also, your repository or or some other place you wish to host it, you have to put your original game design document available for other people and me to compare what you designed and what you came up with. So ensure that these things are online and accessible when you submit something. We are on the Moodle only asking and requiring you to provide us link to those assets, and it's up to you to ensure that those assets are actually reachable. On the second thing, yes, today's talk was about theory on how games industry works and how games are made, how money is made in the games industry. This lecture will be supplemented by an industry viewpoint in a couple of weeks, when one of our university's old students who actually graduated and studied on software engineering here with LUT University talks about how his game studio got started and what were the things that they were doing right, what were the things that they were not necessarily doing right, and how the first couple of years went. So this presentation will be put online on week 45, and we'll see if we can get an additional comment track or something like this from the presenter himself. So until next time, we'll see what sort of a video with the industry viewpoint we are going to have, and perhaps even an interview or possibility to meet the person who was talking about their business and their game studio. But this is something that I will inform you more about later. So to set matters right, here is also one Notion slide about the assets I just asked you to put online. So it's fairly straightforward, because to Moodle you are only expected to submit links to these materials. We also, of course, expect that these materials stay online until the end of this course. So when you get the final grade from this course, then it's okay to remove those assets. And of course, because we have several people here, almost 80 students currently taking this course, it's up to you to ensure that all the links and assets and the deployments work following the given instructions from the first lecture. So if there is no materials available, or there are simply no materials, or you didn't submit everything, there will be no grade. If the teachers or the other users who are going to be test playing your game don't have permission to access all the things required, there will be no grade, or your grade will be failed. And also, when asked to test out a couple of other students' games, if you submit no review or report on what you found out, there will be no grade. And of course, we cannot, for fairness and equal treatment policies, because of them we cannot and will not accept things submitted after the deadline has passed. You have been given this entire semester to do these projects, so if you submit something after the deadline, you'll have to wait for the next implementation of this course, which will be taking place in next summer period. Of course, if your tutorials or your own game end up being failed, or they require further work, I will be in contact with you and give you further instructions how to work with that, but only in a case where you have submitted something before the deadlines. Okay, but these are all in Moodle, and the Moodle also explains what you need to submit and how and where to submit it, so please check that out for more details. Finally, for those of you who are new to LUT University, I want to use this last slide to remind you that if you pass this course successfully, there's usually a Finnish Game Jam code camp right in January as one of the first code camps of a year when the holiday break at the end of the year is over. So if you are interested in game development or trying out working in a group, making something funny or nice or interesting together, provided that we are okay to do that because of Corona situation and such, there will be a code camp focusing on game development as a free-form game jam where you will be given a random theme and expected to do something with the theme during one weekend long game jam session. It's usually fairly fun, if sometimes aggravating because the tools don't work, but it's as an experience, it's a very funny thing. And usually some students end up taking it several times, first for the course and the study credits, and then just for fun a couple of times after that. So go there and check your email and announcements in January, and you will be getting more information about that after the holiday break has ended. So, but for today, thank you, and have a nice weekend and enjoy working with your game project. We are here to have fun and while we learn about the games industry and game development.